apparatus of visuals, whether mental such as dreams or physical such as art. They can also be expressed physically like an embrace upon reunion with loved one. There are numerous action structure configurations for every set of circumstances. If someone offends you, you can stay calm and repeat politely, use vitriolic words to reciprocate your feelings, but hold on, become physically violent, or attempt an action accurately and authentically articulating one's absolute avoidance of aggression along an abandonment of all the altercation altogether, aka exiting the area.
Sounds silent. Okay, I gotta think about that. So that... Dude, these are so close to not being shit, but I don't know. I think I'm just gonna scrap them completely. They're trying to say something, but I feel like perception structure can just be wrapped up into Zyx by just elaborating on the fact that Zyx is just framework. Because really, that's all that perception structure is trying to get you to think. Perception structure is trying to get you to think about the fact that, like, hey, buddy, you don't exist. You're a collection of frameworks. That's really all perception structure is trying to say, different from Zyx. And then you go down to action structure. Let me think about that one. Okay, it's... Yeah, it's trying to say something. It's something. I don't know. We don't have anything else which directly states what it's trying to say, but I don't know how important it is.
I mean, yeah, all these really are is just putting as many different labels on the experience to just map out just metaphysics in general.
But okay, but it all comes back to why. And it's like, I know why I created these at the time, but now it's like I get God better. I don't need these silly labels on my mind to get God anymore. It's like these were good training wheels. Nowadays, I think I'm good with just tearing them apart. It's like we have what we need from them. I know perception structure is completely useless, but action structures, there's no equivalent. But also, it's like, okay, I'll put it this way: when are we ever going to use that term? When is that ever going to be necessary to describe anything to our audience? And I think I can conclusively say never. It will never ever be useful.
That is true, but I have to think about the fact that we created these concepts, which means we noted them, which I think that if someone's trying to learn them, it could be good for them to at least be able to recognize mentally.
Video. They'll get their own video, but they're not going in the main one. I'll put it that way. These have not earned their spot at the table to be considered the big boys, like Xzaayzyx, Azyx 6, the major framework, the mini to go over these topics. Like, I don't feel like action structures and perception structures have earned the right to sit at that table.
I think ultimately we would go over...
Thought textures was a fucking banger of an idea. The fact that we came up with that one originally is insane, because it's still the word which most accurately describes God, in my opinion, is a collection of thought textures. But the other two, yeah, what were you going to say? Because I am definitely thinking Ixnay on them. And I get what you're saying as far as, like, when we came up with them, they should be shared. They shouldn't just be murdered. They should at least go out to the world. And it's like, yeah, we'll get their own video. We'll talk about them. But they're not, like, my babies anymore.
I wonder, like, if I feel like we'll have to go over at least what they just in talking about Zyx. I think these would be coming up. I think essentially what it is that Zyx, if you imagine Zyx as a coin, and then perception and action structure being the two sides of that coin.
Yeah, but it's just no. It's like, what? No. It's you could. No one ever will and would need to. Is basically like why? I get why. I guess is what I'm trying to say. Because it's like, even though I am emotionally attached to these concepts, like I was in the process of creating them, but it's like
all I mean by that is I'm saying there is the Zyx concept, which is made up of our previously made concepts. We just call it Zyx now, but in describing Zyx, we would be describing aspects of these two in the first place.
Nope.
I feel like.
No, I think you could just... Well, first of all, perception structure can be entirely summarized by saying this one thing, which is it's all of your thought textures. And the second you say that, perception structures becomes completely and totally worthless as a word, because that's literally all it means.
I'm not saying use the word perception structure. All I'm just saying is that what they mean, we will be going over.
If you don't need to say the word, it shouldn't exist in our vocabulary. That's how I feel. There's no need to bloat up our vocabulary with a bunch of words.
I get that. I'm not necessarily defending its existence as a vocabulary.
So then, well, I guess, what are you saying?
I was just talking. I'm making no thing. It's over.
Wait, what did you say? I did not hear you.
I'm making no claim. It is on you.
Oh, got you. Yeah. But yeah, I definitely do get what you're saying, and I definitely do think they should get get their own video, especially when we go through the history of how we got to where we are today. I definitely think then we should go over us sitting in Trace Romanos Nunez talking about the 3 layers of reality. And do we even remember what those were? Do you remember that?
The what now?
The 3 layers of reality when we were sitting in Trace Romanos Nunez, the Mexican restaurant here in Kentucky. This was like a year.
3 layers of reality. What would we have labeled those as? We were talking about. I remember that conversation. We were talking about
Okay, I remember the
frameworks
top layer.
and fragment
Yeah, I remember the top layer was
and facet.
the collection of all frameworks.
Yeah, which was a facet.
Yes. So it was facet frameworks, and then what I always call faggots. What is it actually?
And fragment.
Yeah, fragments. So okay, so let's go ahead and write that down. Facets, frameworks, fragments.
Well, I see the paragraphs we wrote for them.
Okay, no need, please God. Years.
No, you don't want that. You
No,
don't
we
want
do
that
not.
on your.
But so as far as that goes, that literally does just sound like Xzaayzyx. Like that one sounds like facet. That's Xzaayzyx. What was the next one down?
Framework.
Framework. Yeah, that's difference. As soon as you take, well, I guess in the way we used to mean framework, when we meant this, we meant framework in the sense
But
of
in
beyond human framework. Good.
In the Mexican restaurant, we were specifically talking about the nuance of framework, whereas it did mean also like everything
Yeah.
external and internal.
Which I think we should also include in our modern day summary of frameworks. But alas, that's held within frameworks. Man, okay, so that's actually interesting. Framework perhaps provides a more viable description than Xzaayzyx. What do I think about that?
I certainly think that for the beginning, hearing framework and describing that will be a lot simpler than Xzaayzyx.
That's not what I mean. That's a different thing. It's like I'm thinking definition v definition. I think that framework says everything that Xzaayzyx says and more.
But wouldn't a facet be the Xzaayzyx equivalent?
I mean Azyx. I apologize.
Okay.
No, I think that framework has merit on its own ground aside from Xzaayzyx, and that you use framework in the explanation of Azyx, but that they stand alone. Okay, I like that more. Okay, because then you don't need to go into the mental aspect of the physical in Azyx, which I do think needs to be left alone. You need to have one which just means different without needing to go into the connotations of mental difference, because mental difference isn't different than physical difference, and framework allows that spot. So we keep framework around, but facet is useless. Fragment is literally just action structure from the last one, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. Fragment was essentially supposed to be divided up into half perception structure, half action structure.
I don't have any use for those. I do think those are just shit. What do you think? Because I think that someone could give me a counter argument, which I might listen to, but I don't have it personally. I don't have it in me.
I mean, as far as use, I mean, I don't necessarily think it would be useful for me or you right now.
For any,
And it wasn't necessarily. I think.
Say that word.
What is that?
For anyone at any time. Will it
I
ever?
just think that there is some, the fact that we wrote it down, knowing that we were writing down what we were seeing, what we were thinking, then the person should know those things
Yeah,
because it will help them.
but that we'll talk about all of these concepts. But anyways, this went better than I
Okay,
thought it would. As far as like our ability to actually dredge up everything naturally, I'm surprised it went this well.
yeah.
Um,
Uh-huh.
but okay, so moving on from that one. Um, so what are the last two things we kept? We kept framework, and then what was the thing we kept from the one before that?
Thought textures.
Yeah. So we have frameworks and thought textures.
Back to basics, aren't we?
What is it?
Back to basics, aren't we?
Yeah, frameworks and thought textures, those really are two of our best original concepts. The two that stayed around, you know what I mean? Um,
Yeah.
it was just literally sort of the natural selection of ideas. Those were the ones that just stuck around through the course of time.
Everything else was just more of like extra detail on thought textures and frameworks.
Yeah. Yeah, but so that makes me kind of want to do. Well, I guess that basically is what Xzaayzyx, that you would literally break Xzaayzyx down into that. You could say that Xzaayzyx, which is the top layer, which would be the one that stays the same. And then you have frameworks, which perfectly explains Azyx. Those are the exact same thing, literally. And then you could say that thought textures and Zyx are also literally the exact same thing. And you could pretty much get away with it. Although there is a metaphysical distinction that God experiences even material as thought textures, and that isn't a Zyx. So that's interesting. Hmm.
All right, could you repeat that?
Yeah, so basically what I said is that I feel like you could equate thought textures and Zyx to the same thing because all Zyx are living things, and all a living thing is something which is capable of creating its own thought textures. So by that same metric, you could call them the same thing, and they could be the same layer. But then I refuted that by saying, but God experiences even things like material as thought textures. So doesn't that render that description false? And I'm thinking about that more now.
I was at a different. I guess I always had this different connotation of Zix, of it not being necessarily just a living thing, but a node in infinity, or just any pattern that can be labeled. And so in that scenario, the material thing can be labeled. It can be a Zix. It is a Zix. If you're referring to
Okay,
something in particular.
hold on. Let me think about that. So basically, literally, what you're saying is that all a Zix is whenever you categorize more than one thought texture together. It kind of sounds like what you're saying.
Yes, and usually we do that for ourselves and our surroundings. Um, God does that in his own ways.
Okay,
But
hold on. I'm gonna need to think about the implications there. It frankly doesn't even mean bundle of thought textures, which is the most apt description for the previous conception of Zix, but really it just means a labeled thought texture. Which is interesting if you start thinking about humans in that manner, and you start thinking about every moment you're just experiencing a thought texture which you're labeling as Ashton instead of experiencing Ashton
yeah,
as a linear thing. Yeah, I like that. Okay, all right, let me think about this more.
pattern recognizers.
Not even pattern recognizer though, because at the point where it's at now, it literally just means pattern. It just means pattern with a name.
Well, yes, but I'm saying that our role is to recognize those patterns.
Yes.
I'm saying that's what we are.
Yeah, we're Zyx recognizers. We're Zyx creators. In a way.
And we can watch our Zyx walk around and think, but it is still just a pattern we're looking at.
Yeah, we are Zyx makers. That's basically what we are. We're labelers. Okay. I like that. Okay. All right. I will need to think about that a lot more because that's not native to my brain yet. But I like that. That appears to work perfectly within my descriptions. But okay, so in that case, do Zyx and thought textures mean the same thing? Kind of.
I mean, yeah, it's just kind of like it is, as you said, a labeled thought texture. So it's like, yeah, it's like water and ice.
Okay, I'm gonna try and melt that down into one thing.
Ooh, I don't know, but I think the detail is good though to have thought texture and labeled
That
thought
very
texture.
well may be, but I'm gonna see if I can do it.
Well, honestly, wait. I had this system that I think would fit in here pretty well. It is the Xzaayzyx system, but it adds a different one, and it kind of extends it out a little bit. Well, let me pull it up. Okay, so there's Zyx, which same thing applies. But then there's Azyx, which is lack of Zyx. It's the thought texture behind the Zyx. So essentially, the word for thought texture would be Azyx in this scenario, which produces the Zyx, which is just the labeling of it. And then from there, you'd have Xzaayzyx, which means the mini, the bundling of every thought texture. And then you have Axzaayzyx, which means the source of all of that mini in the first place.
All right, I'll come back to that in a minute. I have another thought texture line I gotta finish off here real quick.
All right. Well, I think because like we would recognize that there's a difference between having a stroke and looking at those bundle of thought textures, not being able to recognize the thing, and then being able to label it and witness it. So that's where I think that the term label is good because it applies that we are labeling this process. That's what we're here doing.
Labeling didn't work. Labeling was already scrapped. There was another thing that was before this one, but labeling is far too specific. It's like, let's see. There was some issue, the specific issue beyond specificity that I had with it. I can't remember now. What did you even say? What did you pause
But
it?
that's
Can't remember.
but that is what a Zix is. It's specific. It's something in particular. It's
It's a
pointing out
label.
in all of infinity something is what you're trying to focus on something. You're not doing the Xzaayzyx, you're doing the Zix.
I'm not sure what you just said.
And you're saying it was too specific. I'm just wondering what does that mean? Because like to me, Zix is specific. That's the purpose of Zix.
Yeah, I'm not on board with your whole specificity being good thing. I would go the exact opposite route and say specificity for specificity's sake is inherently a bad thing. Just use words to explain it instead of creating a word. The more
That,
words,
we're talking about two different things. I mean specificity in metaphysics, not the description process. What do you mean? What do you mean by too specific when I talk about the word label?
let me think. It's a specific criticism that I had and that I now can't think of that I've already posited. Yes, whoever's at my door. Yes. Okay, say what we were just talking about. What am I criticizing? Just say that. What am I criticizing?
Why is a label
Okay, hold on.
too specific?
Hold on. Let me think about that. Well, first of all, and this isn't the main criticism, but this is a personal thing. I want Zyx to have specific connotations of person, not just person, just living thing. And I'm not hellbent on that. It's not necessary, but I would like it to be there. I would like to have some emphasis on living entity. And in the
But
current state, it does not at all. Hold on before you refute that though. You should write down your refute because there's a more important one that I'm on the edge of. Hold on. Conclusion. Zyx
yeah,
is, you are right, it is labels. However, it is not labels. And what I mean by that is, yeah, that's the closest word, but it's not at all what it is, actually. It's not whenever something gets labeled. It's basically whenever something gets experienced by something self-reflective. And at that point, it's like, it's basically just when something is experienced. However, the issue with that is whenever you just say when it's something that's experienced, well, God experiences things which are inanimate, so those things aren't Zyx. So it's basically whenever something is experienced. Because, in other words, the reason why it's not something being labeled is because a human being that's just born, right? They can view the ceiling and the chair, and well, they probably couldn't do that after they were just born. Anyways, they could eventually get to a point where they can understand that there's difference between ceiling and chair, and yet still not label each individual thing as a concept, and that would still be individual Zyx. So really what a Zyx is it's just an experience. But it's an experience by something which is self-reflective. And how was I classifying that earlier? I had some more clever way of saying it. Hold on. I don't know. You got any thoughts on that?
all right. So I did have thoughts. I wrote down some ideas. I want you to think of them. I don't know if they're good. So as far as just different solutions, one of them is that I was thinking about it and I was like, yes, there needs to be a difference between a so-called inanimate Zyx and an animate Zyx, because obviously there's a difference between a being and a non-being. And so I was thinking perhaps it could be as simple as calling the being, the self, Zyx, and when referring to the node or the thing, whether the inanimate Zyx, you could just call it Zyk. And or you could call it, this could be the label for Azyx, which would be the opposite of the Zyx, whereas Zyx is internal, Azyx would be the external. So those are two alternatives for at least labeling the both things, and being able to have descriptions for both. What do you think of that?
Repeat the first idea again. Hold on, geez. I need to fucking toke up, apparently. My brain is full on shutting down right now. I don't know if it's because I'm tired or what's going on. But anyways, continue.
It's the simplest one. It's just Zyx means self or being, and Zyx means node or thing, or just the inanimate Zyx. So they basically mean the same thing. It's just
Hold on, I gotta go downstairs and look for something. I'm gonna think about what you just said. What? Okay, here's what I think about that. I think that the Zyx dynamic is handled by thought texture and Zyx, and that we just need to clearly describe what we mean by what I was saying a minute ago, which is what is the perfect descriptor of what you're calling labeling. Because labeling is the best word that I've been able to come up with so far, but it's not the best word. It isn't. We may need to come up with our own, but that's not the right word for it. It's not whenever something is labeled.
I mean,
It's whenever something simulates infinity back at it. It's exactly what the first label for it was.
so whenever something would you say whenever something has an experience?
Yeah, and yet again, that's where I've tried to say multiple times, but then I always come back with the same issue, which is you cannot include God's experience of material within this category. At that point, you're saying nothing. So to say that it's an experience is wrong because God experiences material. Also, I was thinking about that some today, and I came to the conclusion that just sort of an interesting one, that basically God does not experience all non-sentient things as the same thought texture like I once thought he did. It's more that he would experience every non-sentient thing in our universe as the same thing because it's all made of quantum physics, which is one thing. So if God's thought texture experience of our oven and our microwave are going to be virtually the exact same, because
Heather,
huh?
my computer turned off. I couldn't hear you.
That's awesome. What was I saying? Last thing you heard?
You were just starting.
Like what was the? Well,
I don't necessarily. But whatever you were just talking about, you were just getting into that. About presumably something about Zyx.
yeah, it was about the material, about non-sentient material.
Oh,
How I used to think that God would think of all non-sentient material with the same thought texture. There was a monotonous thought texture, which I always thought of as light, purple, and hollow. I don't know why, and I don't think that actually has any accurate bearing over what it does feel like. But that's how I
you're
always
saying it doesn't actually feel purple to God? You really don't think it really does feel purple?
something interesting
Blasphemy.
is that I think that I may have been getting some insight into quantum physics, and perhaps that's what quantum physics feels like to God, is purple, hollow, and
Feels
light.
purple.
Perhaps
Yeah.
some equivalent, some rough equivalent that can only be funneled into the human brain is purple. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But anyways, the light. Anyways, all of those things. That is just okay. Here's what I'm trying to say: is that an oven and a microwave, or an oven and a cabinet, those two things are going to feel the exact same thing to God because those are both made of quantum physics. So God is going to experience them at sort of their base level, and he's going to experience everything in our universe as the same thought texture. Every inanimate object in our universe as the same thought texture because they're all going to be made up out of the same material, and the same material is inherently going to produce the same thought textures for God. But that doesn't mean that across universes, across bubbles, right, across Azyx, that there's going to be, you know, any constant with that. And that actually the feeling of an animate material can change, but the thing that makes an animate material inanimate isn't its one thought texture. It is specifically that it is only capable of producing one thought texture, if you see what I mean. The thing which is important about immaterial objects isn't that there is a thought texture of being immaterial. It is the fact that and I suppose I'm only really capable of thinking about this in terms of mass, and I wonder what the equivalent of this could possibly be across other dimensions. But in one space of mass, this entity is only capable of coming up with one thought texture, right? So in other words, the difference between inanimate and animate object is just the ability to, within one unit of space, come up with more than one thought texture. That's all a brain is. That's all a mind is. That's all a human being or a sentient